Hello and welcome to Writers and Books Visiting Author Series. My name is Dan Hurd. I'm the Director of Adult Programs. Writers and Books is a nonprofit literary arts center in Rochester, New York. We offer readings, workshops, and literary programming for people of all ages, all currently available online. Our theme for 2021 is Taking Care. We're celebrating different ways we can take care of ourselves and take care of others this year. For our upcoming schedule, visit wab.org. Please say hello in the chat and let us know you're out there. You can also submit questions to the Q&A function. We're so excited to have Aricka Foreman with us this evening. First, we'll hear Aricka read, then she'll be in conversation with Jonah Webster. Jonah Webster is a poet, educator, scholar, and conceptual sound artist from Flint, Michigan. His debut poetry collection, Stereotype, won the PEN America Joyce Osserwile Award and was a finalist for the Lambda Literary Award for Gay Poetry. Just want to take a moment to acknowledge our sponsors here. Aricka Foreman is a poet, editor, and educator from Detroit, currently living in Chicago. Author of the chapbook Dream with a Glass Chamber and the full-length collection Salt, Body Shimmer, she has received fellowships from Cave Canem, Callaloo, and the Malay Colony for the Arts. Her poems, essays, and features have been widely published. The poet Alison C. Rollins has said about her work, "As vital as water is to the human body, Salt, Body Shimmer proves just as indispensable." Adorned in the camouflage it takes to be a woman, Aricka Foreman invites us to wade into an iridescent realm of blue magic. Each poem in this book washes up like a seashell, beautiful yet sharp. Aricka, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Dan. I'm super excited to be here with Writers and Books. So again, shout out to y'all for inviting your girl to come through. And I'm extremely excited to be doing this conversation with my brother in love and language and Black joy and all the things, Jonah. Super excited to see your gorgeous face. So yeah, I'm gonna read for 20 minutes. Let's see what I can fit in during that time. And I'm also gonna set a timer because I am efficient. All right. This poem is called Monarchy, Malarkey, the Beginning, the End. Neither of us were ready for it. My poor mother dealing the talk as the crisis came, sex, and the bloom that preceded it. Like a war room preparation, she came with what she knew. Doctrines on the lathe of life, how to hide secrets. Ashamed of the slick brown tributary, I tucked the cotton into my pants pocket, sure it'd be missed in the weekend wash. My poor mother, her hands full of questions. When did it? Why hadn't I? The lies falling from my mouth like dead stars. I held each cramp of shedding, clotted tissue, scrub stains, hid evidence. How we're taught to think ourselves criminal, perpetuate elaborate hoaxes, all witches, sinners, all women, witches, maybe. If I could go back, I'd ask, what's in the blood? She'd say of our miraculous machinery, handing me a tampon, a diva cup, a wrench, a pickaxe. For this business of ritual, listen, get to work. I have two poems in the book with the same title that was derived kind of off of a morning car ride with my then roommate while we were playing NPR. And this expert was talking about this notion of fear leaving behind its own scent. And that kind of just like stuck with me. So of course I had to write not one, but two poems about it. So this is the first, Fear Leaves Behind Its Own Lie. It wasn't that bad. He wasn't quick, was slow, and the cane creak sticks. He didn't finish. In a dream, had you touched him where grits were stirred, It was a Saturday morning. It was summer, season for running. He said after, titties getting big. You dreamed it, the hallway. Pressed your hair between two hot metal plates, bathroom suffocated by sweet stink. He stood inside the doorway. You stood together in the dark backyard of the dream. He's dead now. Whose side is it anyway? Grass megawatt as the moon. Who sings to you from the deep? Oil cracks, sizzles. Pastel peels, dreams him inside the doorways. Now you're grown in the car toward another late bar shift. After little sleep, you dream again and don't know the truth. The expert on NPR says fear leaves behind its own scent. He reached for you. It wasn't him who tried your mother, you learn later, but can't tell the difference. A friend says over your birthday dinner, you want chicken or steak? Get over it, who ain't been raped? You want to spit. Sometimes it's not him, but him. This ain't about desire, so let's stop talking. It's a barbecue, lighten up. Everything's all right, ribs on the grill turning tender. Witch picked herbs to suture. He points toward the yard. There, a gold fountain. In the dream, he knows what he means. A good man will kill for his, erect a monument. You can't run around with no bra on. You can't run around. It was quick, the turning, tender, tender. The dream creaks, primes the season for stirred mornings. Fear leaves us behind. It owns some kind of lie. Fear leaves behind its own lie. When the thieves popped off his wife's new hubcaps, set the shiny machine on bricks, my father kept his gun near, hollering, "Who is it?" from the other side of the door, inside a gate, behind another door. It's late. When I return, 3 times I shout my name between the deadbolt's slow slide. From behind bars on every door, across every window, except the living room, where one might, over warmed day-old coffee, take note the wild fat pheasant straggling in the yard. The neighbor pruning back what chokes her glories, and no, not even when her window glittered across the grass, when the bullets did their death dance, after her husband closed the pawn shop late, did my father move, a man of men who clamored for land they could pass down as genes, who wished for sons, settled for daughters, who might bring home husbands, who could rope a tree trunk to their back, but not speak of want without a drink doing its duty. Hold immune from the risk of mental illness like a resigned lover. Hold slaves cannot own property enough to know desire can drive a man mad, a man who believes he's free, mad hatter. We dress it in cornmeal, lay it in hot oil, surprised by the sting scarring our wrists. The remedy, sometimes the injury too, that crawls into our beds at night like a prophecy we ignore. Journey to the Garfield Park Conservatory while reading The Red Poppy. Convinced the lush green could hush the static between my ears, I wait for the train to curve me toward glass rooms thick with humidity and fauna. On the platform, a man offers pocket-worn mints from his ashen hands. No, thank you, sir. And I'm already a stank-mouthed bitch. It's only Sunday. It's not even dusk. Soon, I'll touch the carnauba wax and Shelia palm soaked in hand-me-down light. The great thing is not having a mind. As the door snapped open between cars, jerks the mint giver back and forth like a doll, while the car swells with a scent of piss. Feelings, oh, I have those. A passenger in his elbow patch tweed shifts, uncrosses, and recrosses his legs, his nose keeping the book's spine from snapping shut. Did you permit yourselves to open once? I have so little to give. Trace the page as he shuffles, sits inches from my face, scream asking, is you a real nigga? Is you a real nigga? Until he's out of breath. At California, the passenger abandons me for the next car. I press my finger into the page, soften against the hard seat. Sir, I don't know if I am. Though I wanted to tell him where to find the 70 graceful fronds from around the world, cicades older than us. And I wanted to ask how long he's been here, which year drove him over or showed a vision of the world afire. Ask if he knows about the house in my dreams, where the keys chime on the walls so frequently they feel like a warning. But he fans me off and exits between cars. The tracks rattle beneath the rocking. I speak because I am shattered. Shit, me too. Me too. Humorism. Night alone in the beautiful borrowed house, I vow never to watch another horror film where the woman squeaks a dish clean, sings braless between Joplin's threshold throat, pleads, Lord work, not to leave her down here in it. She's a bow on a handsaw, thin and tinned, her water on metal cutting through. Birch limbs drop appendages of pine cones, mimic ghost fists on a dinner table. The driver says, what a perfect place to be murdered, and laughs. Outside, the deep-seated sea skirts its fog hem just beyond the dim glow of porch light. I am almost always afraid. Little humor in the tea leaves. Almost always a body of little lemon pills to sleep or swim in it. Suck the songs back when Sandra and Renisha and Corinne. Sleep comes and does good, or the fitful dreams scattered like black mollusks along a Massachusetts shore. The whole keeps our music all horsehair pulled taut on the wind bow bend with teeth. It's cool, keep it. Rinse the silver pans until they creak and moan. Wipe the counter smooth, tuck in, keep a nightstand light on. Be a mother figure with a maldescent faucet to drink from. Be the bridge rot breakable, no discernible beam left. Click down, quick, switch back, don't say her name, a wish that maybe you'll say mine, inferred punchline, line break, bone broke, say it, I dare you. And then I think I have time for 2 more poems. Always something here to remind me. I face myself when I hear the news. Driving toward the mall to buy the kind of camouflage it takes to be a woman, say, I'm good. The summer mild long, my sister still warm in her grave. I feel most dead these days, grief a tick latched at my neck. I am most lonely when I feel this dead. In the parking lot, the engine runs. The podcast host press, I am so fucking tired. I'm tired of being peaceful. I'm tired of this shit. What else do we have to do to be treated human? A woman slows her walk toward her minivan, my volume full blast. She winces, and I realize how hard I'm sobbing. I don't recognize my sound. I don't wipe my face. I walk inside, tell the counter woman without looking, NW47, and the block powder in deep dark, please. And when she, no, that can't be right. You're much lighter than that. I stare. And she stares and waits. And I stare, say nothing. And we go on like this under the flickering fluorescence until she retrieves a foundation 2 shades lighter, opens it, taps it on a mirrored disc, dabs her sponge, and she doesn't ask before reaching. And I don't pause before grabbing her wrist. Just get me what I asked for. And she stares, and I stare, the light still buzzing, And maybe I haven't been dead, but living in the second stage of grief, this rage that drops its red hot pin on a map. Missouri, Michigan, Florida, New York, Mississippi, California, where I look for other words for meadow, marrow, crow. I want more than what I get, where there are no more Black dresses or mothers with carnations pinned to their blouses. No causes and no news outlets to say alleged when they mean deserved it. In a different world, I don't have to face myself. I don't take a white lover only to take something back. I pull into the driveway on a safe tree-lined street, set my bags on the counter. My lover texts, "How are you?" I type his name like a prayer. Michael, 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 Michael. Who, she asks? Who? Whew, was not expecting to upend myself, so thank y'all for sitting and holding that space with me for sure. Let's get some love in this room, right? Let's get some love. Nocturne with dark honey. I burned the last of our summer beneath the new moon, gathered small offerings, a jar of nails dug up from the wet yard, 5 dried rose petals, an empty Bordeaux bottle, dregs of dark honey. The neighbor let out the dog, voice so hush, her why smaller than a mole. Sirens blare blocks over. I turn the match on its head, strike. No matter the hour or years, we are all this sleepless, busying our hands with someone to save or kill. I lit the map we made of partial spells, instructions on how or when to crawl from inside the dark's dark. Between dreams, you warned I could bleed any moment. In one, my mouth was a stream, then a river. There was a swell, and a sea came bearing every name. Desire is a leash I gladly fail to break. My beasts well and the gods we make, the last morning's coffee with cayenne, the loud bright walk home. Behind me, our limbs tangled at the wind's mention. And the song in your throat, low hum, a gossiper ghost I swallowed without flinching. And I'm gonna squeeze in one more poem. Breakbeat nocturne with anemones and lucky fish. February fever and the body begs deliverance. In line, women teem with brink, shudder against the shrill season, ecstatic coronas piercing through the veils between us. I give up my name and pay nothing. Descend into the mouth of the club where cumbia slips off my thick coat. You flit between floors, green rooms, beneath yellow streetlights, high off echolocation, chest warm with menthol, the heat of our need to come. I center my hips in the crowd's nexus, conjure a deep song, salt so sweat a sea of wild anemones. Between your thresh and breakbeat, maestro of trap and tropical bass, I slither and bend into every note. Torso in translation, pelvis sapid premonition, bones drunk on steel drum and hand clap. What is the body for if not this? Black writhe of being alive, the semblance we submit to, and the wild language of air sucked between teeth. In the grimoire of my life, see lucky fish, 1,000 questions curled as cowrie, wants rich, and how long, despite the world's benevolent violence, I keep death waiting, 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 and waiting. Thank you so much.
Oh my God, thank you so much, Aricka, for that beautiful, beautiful reading. It's always so good to hear your work out loud, even when, trying to read the work in my head. I'm like, I know your voice. I have your voice in my head. You're right.
I love
right.
that though too, though.
Right, but it's like, no, I need to have you here. So, all right. So, thinking about our kind of conversation today, I was took a couple notes on some of the things that I think I kind of got hung up on, and was kind of noticing and wanted to kind of explore a little bit more. Definitely when it comes to some of the motifs in the book, and some of the conceits that we saw in this poem. So first, I just want to kind of start. I'm gonna start with reading some of these notes that I wrote, and then maybe we can start the conversation from there.
Yeah. Sure.
Okay. Cool. So I was just kind of blah, 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 blah. It was like the motifs that appear in this collection, especially salt. I'm so thinking about the salt heavy, right? I'm thinking about the salt. I've been thinking about salt just so much now, right? Have not been so obsessed now with salt, but the salt, the blood, and what I would kind of refer to like every minute component of the body, right? That kind of gets explored, right, and kind of staged for us here, parsed and staged. I see that how they all work in the collection to act as a kind of an antagonizing way, or they antagonize these generic systems of symbol making. So I'm thinking about, right, the way that they kind of, resist, agreeable social cues when it comes to making symbols, right? Also, they also resist kind of, easy conflations. And thinking of, salt as a leading conceit of the work, I was kind of thinking it teases towards this kind of literal and metaphorical goodness, or kind of referred to as like an omnipresent accent to the body's experience, or the experience of a body. And thinking about, especially the line, I've learned the salt of the earth way of settling. And that, I think, what immediately kind of got me into thinking of this performance of goodness, taking me to kind of some exegetical places of Mark, book of Mark, chapter 5, verse 13, says, yea, are the salt of the good, yea, are the salt of the earth. But if the salt have lost his savor, wherewith shall it be salted? It is thenceforth good for nothing, but to be cast out and to be trodden under foot of men. And I was kind of thinking about this as this imposition of goodness, especially on the bodies of Black femmes, right? In context of that verse where I'm like, how patriarchal, right, of this language, right? Once its utility, right? Think of, this issue of utility, with salt and with the bodies of Black femmes, and right, and once that utility is done up, right, is kind of being cast and trodden under the foot of men. So I'm kind of thinking that I was really just, stuck in this saltiness, right? You already know, thinking about, being back from the crib, like, what it means to, leave a motherfucker salty, right? You already know,
Real, yeah.
So, I'm always kind of feeding off of that, but there's some of these other moments, right? Like salt degrading the world's fragile questions, right? These, your words and the words of the speakers in the poems, right? Nothing stands still, starkness and light, her salt body, shadow and shimmer. Hope I don't salt. Roast a chicken and suck the salt off every finger. Live. And so I wanted to see, before I kind of think about some of these other notes, like when you're constructing these symbols, or these, or kind of what I would kind of say going against, right, these kind of agreeable social cues when it comes to making symbols, right, in the poem. I'm curious, where, if any, right, is kind of a demarcating line for salt, how it's applied, how it's used as a symbol, right, and its kind of, utility as we might think of it. And in a way, it might be, kind of, analogous to the way utilities of Black femme bodies might be perceived. That makes sense. I know I said a lot of stuff.
No, that's you know how you go off. No, I think that's an incredibly generous reading, and I think thank you so much for that. Obviously, growing up in a Black First Methodist Church background, and then eventually into like the more evangelical, where these notions of the Christian archetype of striving to be a certain kind of goodness as a way to ensure one's position in you know, whatever afterlives, afterworlds that folks of different faiths that subscribe to, right? But I definitely, because it kept coming up, I'm like, why do I keep talking about all this salt? And I'm thinking about like all of the ways in which salt is used. So yes, I'm thinking of ritual, you know, you salt the threshold to keep certain spirits out. I'm thinking, obviously there's so much water in this book. So like, I'm definitely thinking about the ocean, right? And I think I've become quite obsessed with trying to resist that, the utilities of like, you know, Black femmes are discarded all the time. Listen to Black women, except when you in the morning meeting and you want to play devil's advocate, or, you know, protect Black women until they rebuff your romantic sort of gestures, or, you know, even the sort of like for some subscribe to and still do this performative way of being looked at as moral, looked at as holy, looked at as, you know, so much of particularly around the ways that patriarchy overly sexualizes the feminine in ways that are absurd and perverse, is still this sort of, you know, question of how much of that becomes embedded and internalized in the language that we use, and how we use that language as a lens to sort of walk through these multitude of experiences of violence. And I think that's any person's living at a number of different sort of intersectional oppressions and institutions. I almost hate to bring up the word intersectional because 98% of the people who use that word don't even know what it means. Please read Kimberly Crenshaw. Just let her tell you. Okay, great. So yeah, I think I definitely was trying to sort of excavate what it means to sort of recognize the like internalized language that we sometimes allow the outside world to put on us. And how that language, in the way that it's presented, in the way that we apprehend it, is not a shield and it's not a sword to keep us from experiencing those violence, because these systems are inherently genocidal, they're inherently capitalistic, they're inherently, so yeah, there's things obviously about like patriarchy, but there's very specific conversations around misogynoir, and often I'm, you know, anecdotally only thinking of this in terms of other conversations that I've had with other Black women and femmes, right? That like some, if not most of us, our first experiences with misogynoir and violence are from the ones that are closest to us in our community. You know what I mean? They show us what our first harm is, but then they overlay it with like, but this is out of love, and it's not. So then you have to like undo, well, what is that language trafficking in? What is that, you know, sort of, what is that mode doing? So yeah, I think that those were some of the like sort of large investigations that I was trying to figure out what it means to like disengage the language from the body, be re-embodied. That's why there's so many dance poems in the last section where I'm like, you know, I may 98% of the time, every time I walk out of my house, may not feel safe. You know, there's a armoring, a layering of things to try to figure out how to move both hyper visible and invisible. But like the space that I know that I'm gonna be safe and get my life is like my queer kinfolk and community here in Chicago, particularly with like, you know, it's not just the parties. These people are also activists and organizers, but prioritizing joy and prioritizing centering Black femmes, Black brown femmes, Black indigenous femmes, in that space, and allowing that to be liberatory in a way. And so, yeah, I hope that answered your very complex and intentional question.
Yes, yeah, it did. You know, especially thinking about, because I'm just really stuck with like the complexities of the symbol making that occurs right throughout the collection, and especially as I kind of think about how do you resist easy conflations when you create symbols, right? And I think that's something that the text does, right? And I think it works kind of like through this weird kind of like saltiness in the way that like salt is applied or is kind of the vehicle, right, through which some of these symbols are kind of motorized, right. And I think those contradictions that occur, right. One of the contradictions that I was kind of thinking about, and I was wanted to use the poem Fear Leaves Behind Its Own. And I love that you read that poem too, because when I was thinking about it, it's like, salt and these symbols that kind of get grafted upon it, right? Or not even just symbols, right? Actual reference or the real life, the embodied knowledges, right? That are contained by like the bodies of Black femmes. How it kind of plays out through this kind of fraught effect of goodness, right? This imposition of goodness that then kind of in turns to be a spoil, right? Or it turns to be, right? Or not like a spoil, like not like a good, right? Or thinking about good, also goodness in this kind of object status, right? And that how that, this be this kind of, Christian, right? Like I call it like Anglo-Christian, imposition of goodness, right? Christian goodness, another imposition that kind of, in turn causes what I think, or what I'm kind of echoing from the poem, the remedy that's sometimes the injury too, right? And that being a thing that insidiously crawls into the bed at night, like a prophecy of ignorance. So I was really just kind of thinking about, wow, when it comes to creating symbols, and the way you also kind of mentioned, like, the way you mentioned that, how it's embedded in our language. So how is this process, the praxis of symbol making that happens throughout the collection, how is it undoing or upending, right, that kind of that system in our language? Something else I was also kind of thinking about was just kind of looking back, I forgot the title. I did I heard this this really interesting paper by Dr. Shamara Moore. I put her name, I can't remember the name of it. But in the paper, she kind of speaks about how Black femmes, Black women, Black girls, they're not allowed to have their own Bildungsroman, right? And so one of the things I was thinking, like that coming of age is that's not allowed, right, to Black women. Black women are, they are at once kind of, masculine, look at seen as masculine, like another workhorse kind of thing, right, from the very beginning, right, or they are already kind of, seen with this kind of, mature, right, how you kind of say over-sexualized, kind of exoticized from a very young age, right, so that kind of coming of age story doesn't kind of, they're not able, Black femmes aren't able to actually have one, nor do we typically see it, right, and so I was thinking of how the collection kind of, endeavors to peer over the shoulders of its speakers, like looking back at a past, a haunting of temporal or spatial confabulations, these lucid misrememberings, even the deft research and the historiography of the self that occurs in the poems. But how at the same time, right, the poetics and the praxis of it isn't concerned with nostalgia, but what may be possibly unlearned in our return to an origin. And I'll see as it's working against those ordinary grammars, right? That kind of, that hard codified thing. So I was curious to think about, how, or if the genre or the form of kind of, the Bildungsroman kind of prefigures, how much is it prefigured into the work? Or this, kind of looking over, this peering over the shoulder, looking towards the past, metaphorically or literally speaking, how much was this kind of, I guess like kind of prefigured into the work? Like when you're going to the collection, was it kind of set like, as a kind of coming of age thing, or is it just how the work might lead?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think I love that you said lucid misremembering. I think that's absolutely at play, particularly if it comes to not only time passing, but if it's, again, being confronted by that violence, right? And so, what trauma does is quite literally slices of memory, the ways in which Black femmes and femmes in general are often told that we are not experiencing what we're experiencing, including our pain, which is why, Black maternity rates are awful in one of the seemingly most resourced countries in the world, and still, you know, that is happening. So I think part of me honestly wanted to try to resist even doing it, particularly with like a debut full length, because the notion is like, oh, okay, you know, if it's not a project based, then it's just like, oh, here's my life from these times going whatever. But because I think that I'm really, really interested again in memory work, our lessons come from memory work for sure. So it's inconceivable to be able to progress and heal forward towards a thing if you can't recognize what it is, all the lessons, all the things that, you know, were either intentionally mistaught to you or skewed in some kind of way, you know. Yeah, it's impossible to grow without doing that work. And so, you know, not only growth as a person, sure, but like the speaker and speakers in these poems are interested in trying to move ahead in vision. And it's incredibly difficult to do that if you are not able to like move. What is it that Morrison says? You know, you gotta, if you want to fly, you got to give up the shit that weighs you down. You know what I mean? So it's like, I mean, yeah, has to be it, you know? And I think that's like an interesting, I don't know if it's reclamation, but I think that it's an interesting practice, again, like you mentioned, because we often are not afforded that kind of, you know, our childhood gets interrupted from a number of different factors, right? Exactly. So yeah, I guess I wasn't really particularly thinking about that literary device intentionally in that way, but I think as the poem started to come together and I was trying to figure out what, not necessarily what the narrative arc, but what the like, I feel like this book runs in like an energy arc and not necessarily a narrative arc. Like it doesn't mean that all of the adolescent childhood things are in the front section. They'll pop up in some other ways, but it was definitely an energy arc that I wanted to mimic what it's like doing that memory work, to like be past a thing, but then be in it and then sort of like bend time in that way, because it's very, you know, corporeal. Memory work is very corporeal, you know? So, yeah.
Yeah, you know, it brings me to thinking of, you know, the poem, the second iteration of Fair Leaves Behind Its Own Lie. Thinking about actually some of the research behind it, or what that poem is in conversation, or who, right? So first, I might actually just say a little bit about the article, and I do have it noted down. Let me go back to my notes. The article by Dr. King Davis, Blacks Are Immune from Mental Illness, from the Psychiatric News. I want to see if you could say a little bit about the relationship or the conversation that poem has with that article, maybe a little context about what that article is saying, and then how that informed the poem, and how it also might have informed, like I think what you said just a little bit ago, right, about people not believing, you know, Black femmes, Black, you know, young women, you know, Black young girls and Black women, right, believing them in you know, their pains, what they say that they experience, right? And so I want to see if you could say a little bit about that relationship. And then also maybe, I'm sorry to add this other thing, because I'm thinking about intake interview also, right? And so how does intake interview then find its place in this context, right? Of disavowal, right? Of you know, thinking of Blacks are immune to mental illness, or, you know, Black girls, Black women are immune from you know, pain or you know, trauma.
Right. Yeah. I had actually, while I was in grad school, I was reading the DSM-5 for like kicks, I guess. I don't know what I was doing, but I was really interested in coming across the research of Dr. King Davis, who I believe is still at UT Austin, and before it was demolished, and I believe this is in South Carolina, it was the first insane asylum for colored folks, so it was already segregated. And you know, obviously we can get into like the whole carceral nature of like mental health institutions, particularly in this country, and like the history of that through Europe and throughout a number of different places where that institution sort of, right, it was made to criminalize people. It was not made to help folks, right? And so what, before the institute was destroyed, Dr. King Davis and I think some folks in his sort of academic camp found all of the records. They were like about to be destroyed, degraded because they had been sitting in this abandoned building for so long, degraded by time, degraded by dust and moisture and things like that. And so, and I still think it's still trying to find more funding and in the process of like digitizing and having all of these records available. And so the lines that are in the poem are taken directly from some of those records that I was just really interested in, not only just in trying to understand like the framework of how to talk about mental illness and trauma and its impact amongst Black folks, particularly in this country, but that, you know, it's absurd to me to say that because, what was it? Slaves didn't have the burden of owning property. Therefore, how could they at all be subjected to mental illness? And I'm like, 439 years of captivity for starts? Like, what do you mean, right? So again, it's all this like unlearning this historical language that obviously is racist, that obviously is not at all beneficial to anybody involved. But then also thinking about like, well, what does that mean? Like land is such a big thing in the Black community. And I remember specifically like my dad getting really, really mad that like, he needed to, this was like during a number of different housing crises, particularly in Detroit, and he didn't want to let the house go. He was holding on to this house that was this financial burden for him and my bonus mom, because under the you know, pretext that like, you know, I have this in the family for my daughters. And me and my sister are like, we don't want that house. We don't, ain't nobody moving over there. No, we over here chilling, you know what I mean? But I do think that like, you know, to talk about land and land ownership amongst Black folks is really complicated because of our history, but it's also further complicated by the fact that the land is still stolen. It's still indigenous land. It's still haunted. So like, what are you talking about? Okay, so you know, it's a complicated sort of thing. And I think those complications, particularly I notice this amongst like a certain generation of Black men, where it's like, get you that land, you get you that house, and you're gonna be all right. That's like a wealth investment in a way to try to recoup what was done, not only during slavery, but during sharecropping and then redlining and all of that, right? And so that's gotta be like a strange construct to try to live in. It's gotta kind of like screw your brain up a little bit, right? And so definitely thinking about that in the second poem with my dad. But then in the intake interview too, you know, the first time I had to fill one out, it's just kind of like a strange thing. And some of the questions, honestly, are kind of strange. They've changed, they've evolved over the years. But I thought, you know, what, there was one section where I was like, you literally are asking me this question 5 different ways. And I'm telling you that I'm suicidal and I need help. And so me answering in a number of different ways is not going to change that outcome. But I was thinking about like, what would it look like? Because that's how violence does too, right? That like, did you witness violence? Have you seen violence? Has violence impacted you? And so trying to like make different kinds of erasures out of that one question to try to imbue that movement, that strange thing of being more othered in an already set up othered space that is also carceral, that is also, you know, and thank God that I did, you know, because I'm still here, but like, you know, it's a fraught sort of relationship. So those were some of the larger, I think, questions that I'm still kind of trying to trouble actually, but here was a start. And I think, Dan, are we good on time? I don't want to.
I think, yeah, I don't know. I asked some really long questions, but I thank you for your answers for that. You know, I think it's really illuminating thinking about those contexts, right, between like, you know, disavow and avow. I think, you know, Body Shimmer is like heading straight into everything that has been disavowed, right, as far as speech, utterances, you know, and of course the syntactical arrangements that, you know, we see in there. And I just love how it definitely goes against, you know, that those ordinary grammars. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, too.
Thank you so much. I see your question, Allison. I'm gonna email you because I don't want to cut into people's dinner's time. Y'all on the East Coast, y'all an hour ahead of me.
That was great. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you both for being here. I want to thank everyone for coming. Buy their books. The links are in the chat. Yeah, this reading will be online on our YouTube channel. So check back for that. And I want to say thank you and have a great night.